Random House Audiobooks presents The Truelove by Patrick O'Brien, read for you by Tim Pigott-Smith. The Truelove. Standing at the frigate's taffrail, and indeed leaning upon it, Jack Aubrey considered her wake, stretching away neither very far nor emphatically over the smooth, pure, green-blue sea. A creditable furrow, however, in these light airs. She had just come about, and as he expected, her wake showed that curious nick where, when the sheets were hauled aft, tallied and belayed, she made a little wanton gripe, whatever the helmsman might do. He knew the Surprise better than any other ship he had served in. He'd been laid across a gun in the cabin just below him and beaten for misconduct when he was a midshipman, and as her captain he too had used brute force to teach reefers the difference between naval right and naval wrong. He had served in her for many years, and he loved her even more than his first command. It was not so much as a man of war, a fighting machine, that he loved her, for even when he first set foot aboard so long ago, neither her size nor her force had been in any way remarkable. And now that the war had been going on for 20 years and more, now that the usual frigate carried 38 or 36 18-pounders and gauged 1,000 tons, the Surprise, with her 28 9-pounders and her less than 600 tons, had been left far behind. In fact, she and the rest of her class had been sold out of the service or broken up, and not one remained in commission, although both French and American yards were building fast, shockingly fast. No, it was primarily as a ship that Jack loved her, a fast, eminently responsive ship that, well handled, could outsail any square-rigged vessel he had ever seen, above all on a bowline. She had also repaired his shattered fortunes when they were both out of the navy. Himself struck off the list, and she sold at the block, and he sailed her as a letter of marque. Furthermore, he was now her owner as well as her captain, for Stephen Maturin, the frigate's surgeon, who bought her when she was put up for sale, had recently agreed to let him have her. And what was of even greater importance, both man and ship were back in the navy. Jack Aubrey, reinstated after an exceptionally brilliant cutting-out expedition and after his election to Parliament, and the frigate as His Majesty's hired vessel Surprise. Not quite a full reinstatement for her, but near enough for present happiness. Her first task in this particular voyage had been to carry Aubrey and Maturin, who was an intelligence agent as well as a medical man, to the west coast of South America, there to frustrate French attempts at forming an alliance with the Peruvians and Chileans who led the movement for independence from Spain, and to transfer their affections to England. Yet since Spain was then at least nominally allied to Great Britain, the enterprise had to be carried out under the cover of privateering, of attacking United States South Sea whalers and merchantmen, and any French vessels she might chance to meet in the East Pacific. This plan had been betrayed by a very highly placed, but as yet unidentified, traitor in Whitehall, and it had had to be postponed. Aubrey and Maturin going off on quite a different mission in the South China Sea, eventually keeping a discreet rendezvous with the Surprise on the other side of the world at the mouth of the Salibabu Passage, the Surprise in the meantime having been commanded by Tom Pullings, Jack's first lieutenant, and manned, of course, by her old privateering crew. Here they sent her more recent prizes away for Canton under the escort of the Nutmeg of Consolation, a charming little post-ship lent to Captain Aubrey by the Lieutenant-Governor of Java, and so proceeded to New South Wales, to Sydney Cove itself, where Jack hoped to have his stores renewed and several important repairs carried out, and where Stephen Maturin hoped to see the natural wonders of the Antipodes, particularly the duck-billed platypus. Unfortunately, the governor was away, and Jack's hopes were disappointed because of the ill will of the colonial officials, and the fulfilment of Stephen's very nearly killed him, for the outraged platypus, seized in the midst of his courting display, plunged both poison spurs deep into the incautious arm. It was an unhappy visit to an unhappy, desolate land. But now the odious penal shores had sunk in the west. Now the horizon ran clean round the sky, and Jack was in his old world again, aboard his own beloved ship. Stephen had recovered from his distressing state. The bluish leaden colour of his face had returned to its usual pale yellow, and he could now be heard playing his cello in the cabin, a remarkably happy piece he had composed for the birth of his daughter. Jack smiled. He was very deeply attached to his friend, but after a couple of bars he said, "Why Stephen should be so pleased with a baby I cannot tell. He was born to be a bachelor. No notion of domestic comforts, family life, quite unsuited for marriage, above all for marriage with Diana, a dashing, brilliant creature to be sure, a fine horsewoman and a capital hand at billiards and whist, but something of a rake. Quite often shows her wine. In any case, quite improper for Stephen, has nothing to say to books, much more concerned with breeding horses. Yet between them they've produced this baby, and a girl at that. He longed for a daughter, but I wish she may not prove a platypus to him." And he might have added some considerations on marriage, so often unsatisfactory, had not Davidge's voice called out, "Every rope an end!" cutting the thread of his thought. "Every rope an end!" The cry was automatic, perfunctory, and superfluous, for having put the ship about, with rather more conversation than was usual in a regular man-of-war, but even more neatly than in most, the Surprises were rapidly coiling down the running rigging, braces and bowlines, just as they had done thousands of times. Yet without the cry, something would have been missing, some minute part of that naval ritual which did so uphold sea-going life. Sea-going life, none better, reflected Jack, and certainly at this point he had something like the cream of it, with a good, tolerably well-found ship, for the returning governor had done all he could in the few days left, an excellent crew of former Royal Navy hands, privateersmen and smugglers, professional from clew to earring, with his course set for Easter Island, and many thousand miles of blue water sailing before him. Above all, there was his restoration to the list, and though the Surprise was no longer in the full sense a king's ship, both her future as a yacht and his as a sea officer were as nearly assured as anything could be on such a fickle element. In all likelihood, he would be offered a command as soon as he came home, not a frigate, alas, since he was now so senior, but probably a ship of the line, possibly a small detached squadron, as Commodore. In any event, a flag, being a matter of seniority and survival rather than merit, was not so very far distant, and the fact that he was Member of Parliament for Millport, a rotten borough in the gift of his cousin Edward, meant that independently of his deserts this flag would almost certainly be hoisted at sea, for rotten borough or not, a vote was a vote. This certain knowledge had been with him ever since the Gazette printed the words, "Captain John Aubrey, Royal Navy, is restored to the list, with his former rank and seniority, and is appointed to the Diane of 32 guns, filling his massive frame with a deep, abiding happiness." And now he had another, more immediate reason for joy, his friend having made this astonishing recovery. "Then why am I so cursed snappish, cross in the morning and bloody-minded with it, like an old and ill-conditioned man? It's discreditable in the last degree," he said, and his thoughts ran on. Profound attachment to Stephen Maturin did not preclude profound dissatisfaction at times. For a quick and efficient refitting of the ship, good relations with the colonial administration had been of the first importance. But in that very strongly anti-Irish and anti-Catholic atmosphere, Botany Bay had been filled with united Irishmen after the '97 Rising. The presence of Stephen, irascible, more or less Irish, and entirely Catholic, rendered them impossible. Or to put it more fairly, not just his presence, but the fact that he had resented an insult after a Government House dinner on his very first day in the penal colony. Blood all over the Bathstone steps.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?